But Tisha B'Av is the reminder we're not in. If we were in, we wouldn't be sitting on the floor right now. If we were in, we wouldn't be celebrating Tisha B'Av the way we do. We're not in. And the proof is, as powerful as we are, and we can conquer Iran, and we can conquer Hezbollah, and we're doing as best we can with Hamas, and who knows what else, and we can't go to the Mokum Beis HaMikdash. Go to the Kotel and we have to stop. We have two Eichos. We have the Eicha of Moshe Rabbeinu, and we have the Eicha that we had in the Haftarah, Yeshayahu's Eicha. Moshe says, Eicha Esau levadi torchachem u'ma'asachem v'rivchem. How am I going to bear, how am I going to manage the difficulty of leading you? And he goes into some detail. And we read that Eicha and the tune of Eicha so as to link it to what's happening at the moment. And in Yeshayahu we've got Eicha hayta lezona kirya ne'emana. How did this happen? How did this amazing city become a harlot among the cities of the world? So Moshe's Eicha is future focused. How am I going to manage in the future? And Yeshayahu's Eicha is past focused. How did this happen? How did this come about? And we, at this particular stage of our history and our evolution as a nation, find ourselves standing between these two Eichos. We're asking both those two questions. We're asking, how did this happen? What went wrong? What did we do? How did we fail? And it's preoccupying our national psyche. And at the same time, we're asking, Eicha, how are we going to finish this? What is the plan? How are we going to manage? How are we going to end this with all of our enemies around and about us? How are we going to manage with the waves of anti-Semitism around the world that at one point were just on university campuses and now has infiltrated into the corridors of power to the point where we're left with one friend and even they're a little shaky? How are we going to manage this? So we sit at this very difficult place between the Eicha of Moshe, Eicha Esau levadi, and the Eicha of Yeshayahu, Eicha hayta lezona. And Yirmiyahu, and the Eicha that we'll read tonight, continues along the lines of Yeshayahu's one. Eicha yashva v'dad. How did this happen? And so we need to look at both questions and try and understand. We don't necessarily get to answers on the questions, but to understand the questions. Firstly, on the, how did this happen? How did we get here? And there are so many different factors. And of course, there's the military issue and the intelligence issue that they'll have to unravel and figure out how that happened. But what happened on October the 7th, however they're going to explain it, analyze it, learn from it, it clearly was the Ratzon Hashem that would happen. Because it was completely beyond any kind of rational understanding that there should be so many failures all at once. It just doesn't make sense. Nothing about it makes sense. And when you see a situation that doesn't make sense, you know that it's a different force that's at play. Different things are happening. And nevertheless, we need to understand how did we come to that, but not necessarily from a technical perspective of the military and government leadership, but ourselves as people. And some of you will remember that 2 years ago on Tisha B'Av night, speaking exactly here, I questioned the general approach of sinas chinam. We've got to get rid of sinas chinam because that's why the Beit Midrash isn't built, because that's why it was destroyed, and so on. And I argued, if you remember, that what was going on at that time, this time 2 years ago, 2023, was not sinas chinam. And that what's emerging again and raising its head again at this time is not sinas chinam. Sinas chinam is trivial hatred for no reason. People just have issues with one another. The hatred that we're seeing is not sinas chinam. It's not for nothing. People believe in their positions. They hate each other because of their beliefs. Those who believe in democracy at all costs, those who believe in a Jewish state, and the people in between, each one holds to a belief, and the hatred for one another is not sinas chinam. So what is it? If If sinas chinam isn't the problem, what is? And you remember I argued that what we're suffering from are the reasons for the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, not the second. We're involved in things that are even more serious than sinas chinam. Avodah Zorah, Gilui Arayos, and Shfichus Domim. We're involved in idolatry, we're involved in immorality, and we're involved in murder. And I explained it at that time. We're involved in idolatry, as we learnt in the Matmonim just yesterday or the day before, that you can worship something that isn't an idol. That Harim v'Agvot, if the mountains and the hills and the mountains don't become, according to the way we understood Rashi and Ri, they themselves don't become idols. And yet, Ovdeihem b'Sayif, people who serve these mountains and hills that are not idols are guilty of death. Why? Because you don't have to serve an object for it to be Avodah Zorah. You can serve an idea. And if we're willing, some of us are willing to put liberalism and democracy before Yiddishkeit, before Torah, that's an Avodah Zorah. If we're willing to be so in service of the principles of liberal democracy that we're willing to sacrifice the Jewishness of our state, that's Avodah Zorah. That's a worship, that's an elevating of an idea over and above every other value that we have. And Gilui Arayos, we spoke about the gay parades that were taking place and do take place in Tel Aviv and in Yerushalayim even. Not taking a position on what the situation with people who suffer from those situations. It's just the public nature of it, the celebration of it in Eretz Yisrael. Is that not Gilui? Is that not a symptom of Gilui Arayos? Who knows what else goes on? That's just one public symptom of it, that it's accepted, it's okay. It's Gilui Arayos. And Shfichus Domim is, we've adopted the method of assassinating the characters of people we disagree with. We don't have debate on issues anymore. If we don't agree with somebody, we try to assassinate them. We see it happening in the United States, we see it happening all over the world, and we see it happening here as well. There's a democratic way to deal with a situation if you don't approve of a prime minister. There are debates to have. There's democratic process to get rid of him if you want to get rid of him. But no, you've got to assassinate his character. And we see that not only there, we even see that in religious circles. The ease with which we'll target an individual for his character rather than debate the issues. Murder doesn't only mean you kill people physically. When you kill people's reputations, when you kill people's character, that's also Shfichus Domim. And that we were in an environment 2 years ago, and we still are, where there's Avodah Zorah, there's Gilui Arayos, and the Shfichus Domim. But what we learned this morning in the Medrash is so important that I decided I was going to repeat it with the permission of those who were there. Because there's been a lot of discussion about the fracture between the Jews of the Galut and the Jews in Israel. And a lot of that fracture has been somewhat repaired in certain circles since October the 7th. But there's still a major fracture, and there was a concern that we were becoming two nations. The nation of the Jewish people who lived in Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish people who lived outside of Eretz Yisrael, that we were just becoming increasingly divergent. And work has been done in that area, and work needs to be done in that area, so that there is a true partnership and a working together and a shared love of Eretz Yisrael, no matter where one is living in the world. But there's also got to be shared responsibility. We're going through this agony in Eretz Yisrael of what went wrong. I haven't heard, it doesn't mean it's not happening, but I just haven't heard or read the Jews outside of Eretz Yisrael saying, and in what way did we contribute to what went wrong? We're all focused on Israel. What went wrong in Israel? How could they have missed it? How could this have happened there to them, the army, the government, intelligence? But what we learned this morning in the Medrash here is it's not just us. We're in this together. The Jews of the Galut also share a responsibility for what happened. And maybe the Gilui Arayish, Shvichus Domin, Avodah Zorah that we've spoken about, particularly in Israel, maybe that's particularly in Israel, not that it doesn't exist overseas, but the taina, the claim against us is that in Israel, in Eretz HaKodesh, these things exist. But what about Acheinu B'nai Yisrael, our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world? Why? What is their responsibility? So we have psukim in the Parsha. Vayomer Hashem Elai Lemor. Hashem says, Hashem spoke to me saying, Rav lachem soiv es hahar hazeh pnu lochem tzafoinu. You've hung around this mountain long enough, time to turn northwards. The mountain is not Har Chorev, we're not talking about Har Sinai, he's already referenced that. This is Har Seir, the mountain of Esau. And Hashem says, enough now walking around this mountain of Esau, turn tzafoinu. And then the pasuk goes on. You're now passing through the boundaries of your brothers Esau. Hayoshvim b'seir. V'yiru mikem, they are afraid of you. V'nishmartem moed, but you still have to be very, very careful. Now bear in mind, when we talk about Esau, we're talking about today the West. This is the influence of Rome. This is the culture of Rome. This is the West as we know it today. Doesn't mean that they're genetically descended from Esau. We don't know those things, but that's the philosophy of the West aligns to Esau. Al titgaruvam, don't provoke them. Ki lo etein lachen me'atzam ad midrach kaf ragel, because you will get none of their territory, not even a footprint there. Ki Yerusha le'Esav natati et har Seir, because I've given this mountain of Seir to Esau. Ochel tishberu me'itam bakesef v'achaltem, if you need food, you buy it from them, trade with them. V'gamayim tichru me'itam bakesef ushtitem, drink water, buy the water from them. Ki Hashem elokecha be'erachecha b'chol ma'aseh yadecha, because Hashem has blessed you in every way, and you can afford to pay them for their food and water. You don't have to conquer their territory. It's not going to work. Says Rabbeinu B'chaya, Penu lachem tzafona, amru b'medrash Rabbah, im bata sha'ato shel Esav, if the time for Esau has come, if Esau is doing well, hatspinu atzmechem milefanav. Tzafona comes from the word tzafun, hide yourselves, play down a little bit, don't be ostentatious if Esau is doing well. Shenema penu lachem tzafona. And then v'yiru mechem v'nishmartem od, although they're afraid of you, you must be very careful. What's the carefulness? What's the care? Says Rabbeinu Chaya, mahi ashmira, al titgarubam, don't provoke them. What's the provocation? How does one provoke Esau? So here we have the amazing Klei Yakar. Rav lachem sovet ahar hazeh, says the Klei Yakar, Rabim omrim ki pasuk ze nokeh v'yored ad tehom, v'yesh bo remez l'sha'a u'ledorot. Many say this pasuk pierces the very essence of existence and impacts not only that time, but all future generations as well. That's how important this pasuk is. Rav lachem sovet ahar hazeh. That this pasuk is vitally important. V'inyan sibuv zeh sheyelchu schol lekerem Hashem tzvokos v'lo yikrevu ki yomim rabim liYisrael shayu nadim v'naim svivo v'lo yutan liYisrael koach alehem ad midrach kaf regel. There will be a long period of history, there has been and will be a long period of history where we wander around and around Eretz Yisrael and we can't get in. And some might argue, but that time is over. Now we are in. But Tisha B'Av is the reminder we're not in. If we were in, we wouldn't be sitting on the floor right now. If we were in, we wouldn't be celebrating Tisha B'Av the way we do. We're not in. And the proof is, as powerful as we are, and we can conquer Iran, and we can conquer Hezbollah, and we're doing as best we can with Hamas, and who knows what else, and we can't go to the Mokum Beis HaMikdash. Go to the Kotel and we have to stop. As we discussed this morning, you can go round and round and you can look at the Mokum Beis HaMikdash from every space, but you can't go in, as powerful as you are. So we're in this weird situation where it's not quite the galut as it was for 2,000 years, because we've got our own sovereignty in Eretz Israel to some degree at least. So it's not what it was, but neither is it what it needs to be. We're in that middle space. And that's why we're asking both Eicha questions. The fact is we're still wandering around and we can't get in. And when we're in that situation, says the Klei Yaakov, this will be until the Mashiach comes and says, "V'omdu raglav bayom ahu al har hazeitim," when Mashiach comes and stands on Har HaZeitim and gives us permission to walk in, to enter, to go in. That's when this era will be over. Until then, we're still in this time. V'chol zman sheYisrael holchim schor schor ne'amar lahem pnu lachem tzafona. And for as long as we have to walk around and cannot go in, the principle of turn north applies. And turn north, as the Rabbeinu Bechaya said, means latzpin. V'dashu b'zeim higia sha'ato shel Esav hatzpinu atzmechem. Hide yourselves. V'inyan atzpana zu nireli. And what this seems to me is shim yimtza ha'ish ha'Yisraeli begalut hechel hazeh ezo hatzlacha zair sham. If a Jewish person living in the galut finds himself successful, as yatminu v'yatspinu hakol bifnei Esav. Hide your success. Don't be ostentatious. Don't flaunt your wealth. If Hashem has blessed you with wealth, don't flaunt it. Ki ein lecha umah shemitkanet b'Yisrael kamo Esav. There is no nation as jealous of Yisrael as Esau is. And here we get to the roots of the anti-Semitism. Ki l'da'atam hakol gzula biyadam. Mehem min birkat Yaakov Avinu shelakach birchotav shel Esav b'mirma. They always look at us as the ones who sneakily stole the brachos from Esau. They always know that. That's how they look at us through that lens. The sneaky, shifty Jews who take advantage and are not altogether straight. They find ways to cut the corners. Yaakov tziva lebanav lama titra'u, and Rashi said, and Yaakov says to his sons, don't show yourselves. Pirush Rashi bifnei bnei Yishmael ve'esav ki'ilu atem sveim. Don't show yourselves as self-satisfied. Don't show yourselves as self-righteous, as successful, as wealthy. Ki shnehem sovrim sheYitzchak gazal atzlachat Yishmael veYaakov gazal atzlachat Esav al yedei ishtadlut, because they both believe our wealth is stolen. Yitzchak stole from Yishmael and Yaakov stole from Esav. Al ken tziva davka al Esav penu lachem tzafona shelo yitkane bachem. And therefore Hashem instructs us, when you're dealing with Esav, don't trigger his jealousy. Because he's inherently jealous, you'll never solve that. All you can do is circumnavigate the jealousy. You can't come straight ahead with it. And this is the opposite of what the Jewish people are currently doing. And he said this at his time. Not only do the Jewish people flaunt their wealth, they act as if they're wealthier than they really are. If they've got 100, they live as if they've got 1,000. They live above their means. And they're being over, they're transgressing this commandment. And this behavior is responsible for all of the anguish which we've experienced in the Galut. And wise people will understand what I'm saying and take Musa from it. And we see that is so. The Jewish people have been blessed with enormous wealth. Doesn't mean that every Jewish person is wealthy, of course. But there is an enormous amount of wealth among the Jewish people. And now we're living in a time where even among the B'nai Torah, among Frum people, among Haredi people, there's enormous wealth. Baruch Hashem, it's unbelievable blessing. Who knows if there's ever been a time like that? But we make it known that we're wealthy. We see the wealth being worn on the sleeve. We see the externalization of that wealth and that success and that prosperity. And that triggers the jealousy of Esau. And it's not just because it triggers the jealousy, it's adopting the lifestyle of Esau. Esau is all about the surface. It's all about the covering. It's all about how he appears. It's about the way, it's his marketing, it's his branding, it's his positioning. Esau was the most superior marketer that there ever was. Esau could market himself. That's how he fooled even his father. And how he could seduce women and how he was able to seduce people and communities to follow him. He had that power to show the externalization of himself. And that's why Yitzchak actually says, when Yaakov comes and he says, Hakol kol Yaakov hayadayim yedei Esav, I'm a little confused here. The inner being I can see, I can feel the energy of a Yaakov interior, but I feel the exterior of an Esav. Esav is external, Yaakov is internal. And when Jews start living externally, they're trying to compete with Esav. And if you try and compete with Esau, you trigger Esau's jealousy, and then we get into trouble. And so yes, all sorts of things went wrong in Israel, both morally and religiously and strategically. But things aren't all so rosy in Chutz La'aretz either. The Jews are living a type of life, not all Jews, but there are many Jews living the type of lives that obviously are going to irritate the Goyim and arouse the age-old narrative of Jewish deceitfulness and dishonesty. And I told you this morning that I heard this amazing analysis by one of the experts just the other day, that the left's narrative is that poverty is caused by oppression. And therefore you've got to get rid of the oppressors, and privileged white people are the oppressors. They're the problem. They're the cause of the poverty among the minorities. That's the whole narrative. It was when the socialists came and communism came, probably was to some degree in the French Revolution as well. That's the narrative, that poverty is caused by the wealthy who oppress the poor. The problem is the Jews. They're oppressed and they're not poor. That undermines the entire narrative of the left. So what are you going to say? God blessed the Jews. Well, that undermines the whole narrative of Christianity in that case. How would God bless the Jews who killed their God? That also doesn't make sense. So what's left? Oppressed people are supposed to be poor. The Jews can't have a blessing from God because they're not moral people. So how did they get their wealth? It has to have come from the way they did it with Esau and Yishmael, deceitfully. And then we become the villains. And I saw it's the first time I've seen from anybody of status referring to Israel as evil. Last week, a cardinal, a close associate of the new Pope, referring to Israel as an evil force in the world. You know how dangerous that is? And we all have to take responsibility for that. That's not just Israel. We're fighting two wars. We're fighting a war here and we're fighting a war globally. But the war globally is caused not only, our brothers and sisters overseas need to look look inwards as well. It's not just because Israel's starving the Gazans in the eyes of the world. It's also the way our Jewish people overseas behave and live, and their ostentationism and their externalization. That's also a contributor to the way the non-Jewish world is feeling about us. And so we need to learn to become more interior focused. What about the second question? Echo esa levadi, how can I manage in the future? That's a strategic question. How am I going to do this? How are we going to finish this war? How are we going to deal with anti-Semitism overseas? It's interesting, you all know that in business strategic thinking for the last 50 years, it's been about mission, vision, values, and strategy. Mission is, what are we doing? Values, how do we do this? What do we believe in? How do we practice? And vision, where are we going? And strategy, how are we going to get there? Tom Peters, who was one of the earliest strategic thinkers, told me a long time ago that he offered a prize for anybody who can show him a strategy that was actually implemented. And he said nobody ever did. He doesn't believe strategies are ever implemented. You need to have them, you need to know, you need to have a plan, but they're not implemented. And the reason they're not implemented is strategy is where NACE comes into play. If you know where you're going and you know why you're going there and you're committed to your values, yes, you have to have a plan, but you've got to hold the plan lightly because that's when Nisim happen. If you look at that and you've seen it in your own lives, I'm sure that's where the Nisim, how you do it, how did you get there? You thought you would go one way, but what actually happened, things developed in a different way and things happened and that's where you landed up. And we have to understand the power of Nisim. And thankfully, Baruch Hashem, we are in a position to understand the power of Nisim more than any generation in recent history. Because we're living with Nisim all the time. We're living with Nisim. You know, and as I mentioned recently in a shir, when we look at miracles, don't only look at what's happened. Kriyas Yamsuf was a nes. Tziyas Mitzrayim, all these things were Nisim. Yes, they were Nisim. But when you look at a miracle, don't only look at what happened, because you can always find some scientific reason to explain what happened. The biggest Nisim are what didn't happen. What could have happened and didn't. That's the real nes. We tend to look at the great things that happened. No, just think of what could go wrong and didn't. And you know, we're learning more and more about the intention of October the 7th. It was always a question, a puzzle. I had it, I think lots and lots of people did. If Hezbollah claimed they had 150,000 rockets aimed on Israel, why didn't they use them? What were they waiting for? If Iran claimed they had all these ballistic missiles aimed on Israel, why weren't they using them? Well, now we know why they weren't. They were waiting for the day. And we found the documentation from Sinwar. We know that there was a plan that when October the 7th would happen, on whatever day it would happen, it would be an orchestrated event in which all of the enemies would participate. And you've probably read about this woman, Catherine Peres Shakdam, who is a Jewish French woman who infiltrated the Iranian system and as a journalist and interviewed the Iranian leadership over several years, including the Ayatollah himself. And in 2017, the Ayatollah told her that in 5 years' time, there will be an event that will destroy Israel and change the map of the Middle East. So it was all being planned. It wasn't a coincidence, it was all being planned. What went wrong? What didn't happen on October the 7th? No Hezbollah, no Iran. They all came in a little bit meekly later on. Why? Why not? They could have come in that day, they would have finished us off. We know now that we couldn't have resisted them had it all happened chas v'sholom at once. What a nes. And since then, how many other nisim have we seen? How many other miracles have we seen happen? Day after day, including the recent war that we've had with Iran, what happened with Hezbollah, but even the smaller nisim, day after day. We need to know that when it comes to strategy, yes, we have to have plans. The government has to have plans. What are you doing in Gaza? What's going to happen afterwards? How are you going to manage with this? How are we going to manage with the anti-Semitism overseas? We need to have plans. But our bitachon has to come in there as well. It's in the strategy that we need bitachon. It's in the strategy that we need to know that if we stay close to Hashem, the miracles that have happened in recent years will continue to happen more and more. We're going to see amazing things happen. Because if you look at it rationally, we're in trouble. We're in trouble because we're losing international support. We're in serious trouble. Never mind our immediate problems. But thank God we don't have to always look at it rationally. Because if we look at it rationally, we wouldn't be here today. And I've thought to myself, this is one of the first Tisha B'Av's, last one as well, where we can relate to Tisha B'Av. Harry mentioned the other day that every Tisha B'Av I ask, how are we meant to relate to something that took place 2,000 years ago? How are we meant to feel it? But you know, I think to myself, I did last Tisha B'Av and I do this one, Chas v'sholom, had their plan succeeded, what might this Tisha B'Av be looking like? And it's just too horrific to let your mind go there. We wouldn't be sitting here mourning a Beis HaMikdash of 2,000 years ago. We would be mourning things that are much more immediate. We would be in such terrible pain and suffering such enormous loss. Whether we would be here, who even knows if we would be here, or we would be somewhere else. Who knows how much of Israel we could, God forbid, have lost, that we would be mourning, if not all of Israel, that we would be mourning. For the first time in history since the Churban, we felt what it means to almost lose. We've had a near-death experience. Yes, the Six-Day War a little bit, the Yom Kippur War, but nothing like this. That we've had a near-death experience. It could have been real. It could have happened. And then Tisha B'Av would have been so very different. We know what that is. And therefore we've got to appreciate those nisim. It could have, but it didn't, because the Rebbeinu Shem was protecting us. Iran could have caused much more damage, but it didn't. Hezbollah could have come in earlier, much more aggressively, but it didn't. And yes, some brilliant activity from Israel itself, but the siyata dishmaya, how much could have gone wrong with that deeper exercise that went on for years and years in preparation? How much could have gone wrong at any time from the beginning to the end? Those are the nisim. Those are the miracles. What could have gone wrong and what didn't. And yes, what can go wrong looking forward? How are we going to manage the future? What can go wrong? So much can go wrong. We can lose all the support. We can lose America's support. We can be an Am Levadad. We can be totally on our own. Iran can rearm. The proxies can become bold again. We could have another war. Terrible things could happen. But we've seen the Rebbeinu Shalom's hand. And we've got to understand that when it comes how are we going to manage the future? We can't manage the future. It's only in partnership with the Rebbeinu Shalom. So if we can strengthen our lives in Eretz Israel, each one of us in our own ways, strengthening our lives in Eretz Israel, if our brothers and sisters overseas can strengthen their interior lives and put a little bit less emphasis on their exterior lives, and if we can increase our bitachon in understanding, it's a big question, Eicha, how are we going to cope? But to know and rest assured, based on everything we've experienced, not only through our history, but in the very recent history of the last couple of years, to understand the enormity of Hashem's willingness and ability to help us, and that will be where the future goes. So the Tisha B'Av becomes a time of reconnection to possibility. Yes, we understand what has gone wrong in our history. We understand what could have gone wrong in our history. We see the Yad Hashem. The fact is we're still here to commemorate it, and to understand and recommit to our bitachon, to our trust in Hashem, that ultimately the Mashiach will come and we won't have to celebrate Tisha B'Av the way we do, but it will be a Yom Tov, it will be a time of celebration and happiness.